Hi everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I'm your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. Hey, everybody. What are we getting into today?
Okay, I'm going to warn you right now. This one is heavy, complicated, and is the kind of case that makes people pick sides fast.
Those are the ones that stick with you because you can literally feel the consequences either way.
Exactly. And just so everyone knows, today's episode is a true deep dive. We're going to walk the timeline, the evidence, the testimony themes, and the appeals. And we're going to be very careful about what is known, what is claimed, and what is disputed.
And I want to say this up front. When you have a case involving mental illness inside a family, it can get real messy really fast. We're going to keep it as respectful as possible.
So, let's begin. This is Season 11, Episode 7, Deadbolt, Silence. The case of Jeffrey Pyne. There are murders that happen in the open, and then there are murders that happen in sealed spaces, behind a closed door, behind a deadbolt, behind the illusion of safety. Highland Township, Michigan, May 27th, 2011. A mother is found in her garage, bludgeoned and stabbed. The violence so extreme, investigators later describe it as overkill. The front door is locked with a deadbolt. No forced entry. No ransacking. No struggle through the house. And almost immediately, suspicion collapses inward toward the people who had the key. But what happens when a case is built on inference? And the verdict depends on what a jury believes must have happened versus what can actually be proved. Tonight, we're doing the deep dive because the name Jeffrey Pyne still carries a question mark, one that refuses to die.
Content warning for this episode. We will be talking about graphic violence, a brutal homicide, discussion of mental illness, and references to family conflict. Please take care of yourself while listening, and if now isn't the right time, it's okay to step away.
Highland Township sits in Oakland County, the kind of place where the concept of safe can feel like a guarantee. And in cases like this, the public doesn't just look at what happened. They look at who it happened to. Jeffrey Pyne was described publicly as a high-achieving young man, a former high school valedictorian, an athlete, a University of Michigan student. Now, the case drew national attention partly because Jeffrey Pyne was known as a high-achieving student and former valedictorian, and his mother, Ruth Pyne, was 51 years old. The story that circulates in media coverage and courtroom framing is the story of a family under stress, including reported struggles with Ruth's mental health and medication compliance, or should I say, non-compliance. And that matters because prosecutors later argue that the motive lives there, not in money, not in burglary, not in a stranger, but in simmering frustration behind closed doors.
Whenever you hear no forced entry, it's like everyone's brain automatically goes, okay, so who has access? But that doesn't always mean the obvious answer is the right one.
Right. No forced entry narrows possibilities. It doesn't automatically identify a killer. Now here's what makes the Jeffrey Pyne case a lightning rod. 1. The prosecution's case is widely described as circumstantial, even in later court summaries. 2. The defense position was essentially there is no direct evidence tying Jeffrey to the murder. And 3. Years later, a defense attorney is quoted saying he asked jurors something chilling after the trial. Quote, "If you hadn't had the second-degree instruction, would you have acquitted?" And he said they told him yes. Now that quote, whether you view it as a reason to doubt the verdict or simply a window into jury psychology, is part of why this case keeps resurfacing. Now, according to later court summaries on May 27, 2011, at about 2:30 p.m., Jeffrey's father returned home and found Ruth in the garage, lying in a pool of blood. Ruth had a major wound to the back of her skull and multiple stab wounds to the neck. Investigators noted the front door was locked with a deadbolt. No signs of forced entry. No theft and no struggle through the house. Bloodstains suggested the garage door was closed at the time of the incident. Now, before we go further into evidence, we must pause and look at something that investigators believed sat at the center of this case: the Pyne household itself, because prosecutors argued that the motive did not come from money or burglary or an outsider. They argued it came from inside the home. Court summaries describe testimony about tension in the household connected to Ruth Pyne's mental health and her struggles with taking her medication. Mental illness inside families can create enormous strain, not because people with mental illness are violent, the overwhelming majority are not, but because instability, unpredictability, and caregiver stress can fracture relationships over time. And prosecutors told the jury that those fractures had reached a breaking point. The image presented to the public was almost paradoxical. Jeffrey Pyne was a high school valedictorian, an athlete, and a student at the University of Michigan in Flint. The type of young man neighbors described as polite, intelligent, disciplined. But the prosecution argued something darker, that behind the image of success was someone increasingly frustrated with the instability inside his own home.
And that's the tricky thing. When mental health gets brought into a case like this, because it can easily turn into motive, even when it's just context.
Exactly. There is no record of Jeffrey having a documented history of violence toward his mother, no restraining orders, no police reports of prior assaults, but prosecutors suggested the tension itself, the stress of living with an unstable parent, could explain an eruption of violence. The defense countered with a much simpler argument: frustration, but that is not proof of murder. Now, the public story tends to freeze this family in one moment: a deadbolt, a garage, a verdict. But the testimony that surfaced at trial paints a household already in motion. According to trial-era reporting, Ruth's husband was having an affair and considering divorce in the months before she was killed, and the case record itself acknowledges a relationship described as tumultuous, fueled in part by Ruth's refusal at times to take her medication for bipolar disorder.
That's That's a lot of instability in one house at the same time.
It is. And ethically, we have to say this clearly. Mental illness does not equal violence. But in this case, prosecutors argued that instability created tension, and tension created motive. At around 2:30 p.m. on May 27, 2011, Ruth Pyne's husband returned home. When he entered the garage, he found her lying in a large pool of blood. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and multiple stab wounds to the neck. It wasn't just a couple of blows to the head. It was many. The attack was violent, extremely violent, overkill. The implication behind that word is psychological. It suggests the killer may have been driven by emotion rather than efficiency. But emotion can mean many things, like anger, fear, panic, or personal connection. Now, police quickly evaluated the husband's timeline. He had been at work, and investigators accepted that alibi. There is no indication in the appellate records that he remained a serious suspect after the initial phase of the investigation, which meant the focus shifted elsewhere.
But here's where people always start asking questions later on. Because whenever a murder happens inside of a locked home, every person that lives in the house has to be looked at very hard. I would only imagine that would make the most sense.
Agreed. And critics of the investigation argue that once attention turned toward Jeffrey, it may have never fully shifted away. Now, Jeffrey told police his mother was alive when he left the home around 1:30 p.m. that day, saying she was lying in bed and that he left to do yard work for someone before going to work at an apple orchard where he was scheduled for 3 p.m. But in the appeal record, there's a detail that punches a hole in that account. The homeowner denied that Jeffrey did yard work for her that day, testifying it was completed days earlier.
That's one of those details that can feel small, but it's not small at all because it goes straight to credibility.
Exactly. When a timeline is the spine of your defense, every vertebra matters. Now, after Ruth was found, Jeffrey's father summoned him home from work. And when Jeffrey arrived, he had bandages covering injuries on his hands. Now, those were described as blistering. Jeffrey said he got them at work handling a wooden pallet. Prosecutors argued something else, that the injuries weren't consistent with a pallet, that they were consistent with repeatedly swinging a murder weapon. Now, in the habeas decision summarizing trial testimony, 2 orchard witnesses described extensive experience handling pallets and said the injury explanation just didn't make sense. One witness even testified he tried to reproduce the injury by handling the pallet in different ways and couldn't. Now, I did watch a video on Court TV on YouTube, and I saw these quote-unquote blisters that he had, and to me, and I will include the link in the show notes because I really think everybody should watch. It's about 40 minutes of this interview, and we'll get into more details later about the interview, but when I look at it, I mean, they're absolutely identical. And to me, it's like, you know, if you look at your hand with your thumb pointing at you, it's right where your knuckle is, right before your finger. And so right there, and it was about, I don't know, maybe an inch and a half long, and it looked like a pinch injury. You know what I mean? Where it immediately breaks the skin away. That's what it looked like to me, and they are absolutely identical. So to me, that's what I always think of. And to me, I'm thinking, if someone is swinging a murder weapon, how do you get the 2 exact same blisters on each of your hand in the same spot? doesn't make any sense to me. The detectives are saying, oh, those blisters look like a blister you would have gotten from swinging a murder weapon, not from getting your hands pinched in a pallet. I kind of disagree. Now, the prosecution theory involved an object used to strike Ruth, and testimony described a 3-foot-long 2x4 or a 1x4 missing from the garage workbench, along with a missing black box cutter mentioned in testimony about what was missing from the garage. A medical examiner opined Ruth was struck multiple times in the back of the head with an edged object, such as a 2x4, causing the skull fractures and brain hemorrhaging. And we know from reporting that she was stabbed 16 times in the neck. Now, despite the prosecution's theory about a wooden board and a box cutter, no murder weapon was ever definitively recovered.
I always struggle with injury interpretation evidence because juries hear it and it sounds like certainty, but is often still opinion layered over circumstance. I understand that there's a whole science behind mechanism of injuries, but I don't know. Just sometimes I feel like two things can be true at the same time. You know what I mean? Like two mechanisms of injuries meet in the middle and you get completely different results. I don't know. All I'm saying is I struggle with the injury interpretation sometimes.
I agree. Now, that's a key theme today. How much of this case depends on what people believe is a most likely versus what can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's talk about the deadbolt and the closed system. When a door is deadbolted, investigators often interpret it as the killer had access, either a key or they were already inside. But that isn't the same as saying only one person could have done it. What it does mean is that the case leans heavily on inference. And in later court discussion of the trial evidence, the case is acknowledged as purely circumstantial, though courts describe it as strongly indicating Jeffrey was the perpetrator. So the question becomes, what makes circumstantial evidence strong enough to convict? And what makes it too thin? Circumstantial evidence can be enough for a conviction. Courts say this all the time, but can be enough doesn't mean always is. And in this case, there was no direct quote, "I saw him do it," testimony described in the appeal summary. Instead, the case is built from access, timeline questions, behavior observations, injuries, and motive framing tied to household stress.
And the danger is, once the story forms, every new detail gets interpreted through the lens that it's being formed. The injuries become guilt, the emotions become guilt, the timeline gap becomes guilt. It snowballs.
Yes, and this case is famous for exactly that kind of snowball effect. 9 months before Ruth Pyne was killed, she was arrested after allegedly attacking her son, Jeffrey, including an allegation she attempted to strangle him, and multiple reports say she spent about 2 weeks in jail. That history matters, not as a character judgment, but because it became part of how the case was framed. A family already living at a high emotional temperature.
And it complicates everything because it makes people feel like they understand the house. They feel like they understand the story that's been being told. But understanding something is not proof. It's merely an assumption of an imagined storyline that somebody else assumed.
And I do want to also comment that in the reports, Jeffrey never fought back. Like his mom just went absolutely nuts and he just kind of let her go for it. So that kind of tells me a little bit something about him as well.
Yeah, and either way, the story that's being told isn't proof of anything.
That's right.
Not a smoking gun, so to speak.
Agreed. The evidence investigators relied on came down to several key points. First, Jeffrey was the last known person to see his mother alive. Second, his timeline contained a discrepancy. He told the police he left the house around 1:30 p.m. to perform yard work before going to his job at an apple orchard. But the homeowner he claimed to work for testified the yard work had actually been completed days earlier. And that contradiction became a major pillar of the prosecution's case. And third, Jeffrey had blisters on his hands the day his mother was discovered. He said the injuries came from handling a wooden pallet at work. And also that 2 orchard workers with extensive experience handling pallets testified that explanation did not make any sense to them. Investigators argued the injuries looked more consistent with repeatedly swinging an object, possibly a board. And in the garage workshop area, a board was missing. So was a box cutter, and neither of them have ever been recovered.
But this is where circumstantial evidence gets complicated, because every piece sounds persuasive on its own, but none of it actually shows the crime happening. It doesn't march out.
Exactly. Circumstantial evidence works like threads. Individually, they are weak, but woven together, prosecutors argue they become a rope. The question juries must answer is simple. Is that rope strong enough to hold the weight of a conviction? One detail shaped the entire investigation. The front door was deadbolted. There was no forced entry. The house did not appear ransacked, which suggested the killer either had access to the home, was already inside, or had been willingly let in. To investigators, that narrowed the field dramatically. And when investigators combined that with Jeffrey being the last known person to see Ruth alive, timeline inconsistencies, unexplained injuries, the theory solidified. The prosecution told jurors that all of those pieces together pointed to one conclusion: Jeffrey Pyne killed his mother. In Jeffrey's recorded police interview, footage which was later shown to the jury, he describes his mother coming home with groceries and says he helped bring them in. He also outlines his plan to do work for a woman down the street, transplanting lilacs, helping remove water in the basement, the kind of detail that can feel either honest or overly constructed, depending on the listener. And here's the hard truth. People do not grieve the same way. And we've talked about that before. Some freeze, some flatten, some disassociate. But multiple witnesses testified they felt Jeffrey showed little emotion after learning his mother had died. So when you watch that interrogation video that I alluded to earlier, you're not just watching his words. You're watching how humans interpret affect.
Yeah, affect is a tricky thing. It kind of becomes dangerous because jury's a human, and juries always judge others based on their own insights, their own perspectives. They're going to react to his reactions based on their experiences. So it really is a wild thing when you think about the whole process of juries judging their peers, because they're never actually their peers, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And I'll tell you, I watched the video and I had those feelings as well. I had to keep telling myself, because I'm watching, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense how this guy is behaving. It's hard. It's very hard to just remember everybody handles things differently. To me, it looked guilty.
Not only that, but there's another thing. We're talking about mental illness and everything in the family. So who's to say that he doesn't have a touch of one thing or another? Who's to say that he didn't completely just disassociate?
Exactly.
I mean, it was a traumatic event for him. Maybe, I don't know. It leaves too much to wonder when things aren't cut and dry, when the evidence isn't more direct.
Exactly. And he is in his very early 20s when this happened in 2011. Now, we hold two things at once here. Demeanor can influence perception, and demeanor is not evidence of guilt. Then comes the timeline pressure point. The appellate record states the homeowner denied he did work that day and said it had been done earlier. That contradiction becomes a cornerstone, because if the yard work wasn't real, then what was he doing in the hour he said he was transplanting lilacs? Eventually, investigators sat Jeffrey Pyne down in an interview room. Now, the recording of that conversation later became part of the trial, and portions of it can still be viewed through the court TV archive. And as I mentioned, you can find that on YouTube. Now, when you watch it today, one thing stands out immediately. Jeffrey appears calm, very calm. His posture is relaxed, his voice steady, his answers detailed and organized. Now, it's important to say this carefully. I've said it earlier, but I'm going to say this again. People react to trauma in wildly different ways. Some cry, some panic, some become numb. Others shift into a kind of analytical mode. Shock can look like calm. But in the interrogation video, Jeffrey's demeanor struck many observers as unusually controlled. He carefully walks detectives through his day. He explains that his mother had just returned from grocery shopping. He says he helped bring in the groceries. Then he describes leaving the house to do work for a woman down the street, transplanting those lilacs, and dealing with the water in the basement. The level of detail is striking, but another detail is just as striking. When detectives eventually tell Jeffrey that his mother did not just simply die, because that's all he knew. He knew his mom had died. He didn't know that she was murdered until they told him in this interview. And his reaction is minimal at best. He does not ask how she died. He also does not ask who might have done it. And he does not immediately begin speculating about what could have happened. Now again, demeanor is not evidence, and psychologists will tell you that people process trauma differently. Some freeze emotionally, some detach, but juries are human, and moments like that can shape how a person is perceived in the room.
I'm never going to not struggle with this part of any case, because we expect people to behave a certain way when tragedy happens, but there really isn't one correct reaction. And like I said before, everyone's going to be a little bit different based on their perspective, their path in life, what it was affected by. I mean, how many other traumatic things happened to them, or maybe nothing ever happened traumatic to them. So how do you gauge it? I mean, people that are gauging it from their own perspective. They're not thinking who he is and how he should be reacting. They're thinking about how he should be reacting based on how they would react. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
So it's always this really screwed up perspective thing that gets in the way for me when anybody passes judgment on anyone, really.
I agree. And investigators know that. But perception matters. When someone learns their mother has been murdered, people expect shock, fear, questions. And when those things don't appear immediately, it can linger in the minds of the people watching. For some observers, Jeffrey's calm demeanor felt suspicious. For others, it looked like someone in shock trying to keep control of his thoughts. And that tension between perception and proof runs through this entire case. And yet, despite the scrutiny of his behavior, investigators still faced a deeper problem. Demeanor can raise suspicion, but suspicion is not evidence. And in the Jeffrey Pyne case, the evidence itself would become the center of the debate. The prosecution relied on several circumstantial pillars. 1, the last person to see Ruth alive. Jeffrey was alone in the house with her shortly before the estimated time of death, and as in many homicide cases, the medical examiner could estimate a window of death, but not an exact minute. 2, timeline contradiction. Jeffrey claimed yard work. The homeowner testified the work had been done earlier. 3, hand injuries. Prosecutors argued the injuries were consistent with swinging a weapon. Co-workers testified the pallet explanation seemed unlikely. And 4, the locked house. No forced entry suggested someone with access. The defense arguments centered on absence of direct proof. There was no eyewitness, no confession, no recovered weapon, no direct forensic evidence tying Jeffrey to the act. One of the most contested questions in this case is simple. How does a person commit that level of violence and leave so little trace? Some online discussions claim there was no blood anywhere, even with luminol. But what I can document from trial era reporting is this. Investigators believe the killer washed up at the laundry tub sink, and prosecutors introduced evidence taken from that area, including faucet handles and drain-related items, noting Ruth's blood was found there. So rather than no evidence, the dispute becomes, was the physical evidence consistent with Jeffrey, or consistent with someone else who had time and access to clean up?
Blah, 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 blah. That evidence is non-existent evidence for me. This is Ruth's house in a wash tub area that if she did anything around her house ever, she could have cut herself at any point in time, and of course washed up in that sink, where she is going to get it on the handles herself and get it in the drain herself. So there's a huge difference between nothing exists versus something exists but doesn't identify a person, because that person could have been the murder victim herself, being that it was her house and her slop sink.
That's right.
Gee, well, duh.
And also, I think we also have to remember, you and I both know heads bleed profusely. And this woman, I saw the autopsy drawings, this woman had multiple fractures and a big hole in the back of her head from being hit. So there's blood splatter. I mean, blood should be everywhere.
That would be a bloodbath, an absolute bloodbath.
That's right.
Burning, oozing, splattering all over the place.
That's right.
Well, how did a 20-something-year-old kid clean that well? That I find unbelievable to begin with. Let's just start right there.
Right.
Case closed.
Right.
This is a 20-year-old guy that you're going to tell me not only cleaned so well, but he cleaned a murder scene that you couldn't find blood in from a head wound. Forget about it. This kid's innocent. Right.
And then on top of that, after the bashing, then he supposedly grabs a box cutter and stabs her in the neck repeatedly. Again, a blood bath.
Yeah, no, there's no way. Are they sure that she even died in the house? And the whole locked door thing, let me just say, because you keep saying about the locked house, and I even said about the locked house because, you give me pieces of the story and, you give me the gist. And if somebody would have murdered her outside of her house, dragged her into her house, placed her where she was, and then locked the door on their way out, bam, you got a locked house. Did they ever even ask, or is it anywhere in the transcripts that they said, did your mother always lock the house when she was inside of it? Because I tell you right now, my front door's open, and I'm nowhere near my front door right now, and it's open.
Right. She was in the garage, but, when he left, he said she was up in bed, and nothing was askew. And I will tell you right now, my front door is locked. I always lock my front door. A lot of people can lock from the inside. Who says she couldn't have gone from there into the garage? I have another theory too.
That's true too, because 9 out of 10 times when I come home, I come in through the garage. So if she left for a little while, the front door's locked, but the garage was open, somebody came in, and on their way out, they hit the garage door, so it closed, so people didn't find her right away.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's just so many couldas. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd pin it all on this kid. I don't know, just because he was in shock. If somebody called me out of nowhere and then brought me to the police station and told me that my mother was dead, I would have a million other things in my head before thinking that she was murdered. And then if you tell me she's murdered, I'd be like, what? I think I'd be stuck on the what for about 20 minutes at least.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So what's to say how you would react? I don't know.
Now, when we talk about trials, there's something important most people don't realize. Jurors don't hear everything, and we've talked about that before. In fact, they hear only what the judge allows them to hear. So evidence can be excluded for many reasons. Sometimes because it's unreliable, sometimes because it's prejudicial, and sometimes because it violates courtroom rules. But the result is the same. The jury receives a carefully controlled version of the story, not the entire story investigators have explored.
Yeah, that is always a thing for me. That's something people forget. I forget myself. Whenever you're watching any kind of trials or legal stories or whatever, it's not like a documentary where you get the whole picture. The jury is only allowed to see the pieces the court decides are admissible. And don't even get me started on things that they say is prejudicial, because I'm never going to understand how someone can go through the court system and we don't know all of that prejudicial information on them. Like if they're in court for abusing someone, we're not allowed to know that they've abused 20 people before. Are you kidding me? The word prejudicial, the whole prejudicial evidence, to me, is mind-numbing. But then again, that's why I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, I know it. I couldn't do it. And that means two things can be true at the same time. The jury can make the best decision possible with the information they're given, while still not knowing everything that investigators, attorneys, or reporters may have explored during the investigation. In circumstantial cases especially, that distinction matters, because jurors are asked to assemble a puzzle, but they may not even know how many pieces exist outside of the courtroom. In the Jeffrey Pyne trial, jurors were presented with a narrative built around several key points. Again, a locked house, a narrow timeline, injuries on his hands, and a disputed explanation about yard work. Now, those elements form the structure of the prosecution's case, but the jury was not asked to decide whether every possible explanation had been ruled out. Their task was more narrowed. They only needed to determine whether the evidence presented in court proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that standard can be interpreted differently by different people. Some jurors require direct proof. Others believe a strong circumstantial case can be enough.
When people argue about a verdict years later, they're often debating the entire story. But the jury never heard that entire story. The jury only debated the part of the story that they were allowed to hear.
That's right. And that's why some cases remain controversial long after the verdict. Because once the trial ends, the conversation expands beyond the courtroom. New questions surface, old evidence gets re-examined, and people begin asking the question juries are never asked to answer. For example, what else might have happened? Which brings us to the possibilities investigators sometimes consider when testing the strength of a circumstantial case. Now, what I'm about to lay out are not accusations. They are not. They are logical exercises investigators sometimes consider when examining circumstantial cases. When a case is built largely on circumstantial evidence, investigators and analysts must ask difficult questions. Not what did happen, but what else could have happened? Exploring alternate scenarios does not mean those scenarios are true. It simply tests how strong the existing theory really is. So let's walk through 3 possibilities investigators sometimes consider when examining cases like this one. So in scenario 1, we have the unknown visitor. One possibility is that someone else entered the home willingly, because the absence of forced entry does not necessarily mean the killer lived there. It can also mean the victim knew the person, such as neighbors, friends, service workers, acquaintances. And I'm going to throw one more in there. How about a scorned lover? Now, if Ruth Pyne opened the door for someone she trusted, the crime scene might appear exactly the same. Locked home, no forced entry, no theft. But in this scenario, the killer leaves before the husband returns, and the timeline coincidence places Jeffrey outside the home when investigators believe the attack occurred. There is no evidence publicly identifying such a visitor, but the possibility exists in any case where entry appears voluntary.
Yeah, like we said before, people forget locked doors don't always mean no one else came in. It just means sometimes that someone opened the door, the victim opened the door.
That's right. All right, now another possibility in another scenario is timeline miscalculation. Now this centers on something investigators struggle with in many cases, and that is time of death estimates. Medical examiners can often estimate windows, but those windows are rarely exact. If the actual time of death occurred earlier than investigators believed, that could potentially shift the timeline. Now, in this scenario, the crime could have occurred before Jeffrey left the house or earlier in the day, but this theory runs into a serious challenge. The prosecution believed the timeline fit the evidence inside the garage, and the jury ultimately accepted that interpretation. Still, timeline assumptions can shape an entire investigation. If the clock is wrong, the suspect list changes dramatically. And then we have a third scenario, circumstantial evidence convergence. This third scenario is less about an alternate killer and more about how evidence can accumulate. In some cases, multiple small suspicious details converge around one person. Each detail may be explainable on its own, but together they begin to look like a pattern. For Jeffrey Pyne, those details included being the last person to see Ruth alive, injuries on his hands, the disputed yard work timeline, and a locked house with no forced entry. None of those pieces alone prove murder, but together they formed the narrative the prosecution presented to the jury. This scenario asks a difficult question. Did those pieces reveal the truth? Or did they create the appearance of certainty? Only the people in that jury room ultimately decided.
Yeah, and that's an uncomfortable part of circumstantial cases, because sometimes the pieces really do point to the right person, and sometimes they just look like they do.
Exactly. And that tension is what keeps cases like this alive long after the trial ends. There is a phrase investigators themselves sometimes use when discussing difficult cases, and that is tunnel vision. It happens when an investigation begins to revolve around one theory, and every new piece of information is interpreted through that theory. Now, to be clear, tunnel vision is not the same as corruption. Most investigators begin narrowing suspects for very practical reasons. Who had access? Who had motive? Who had opportunity? In the Pyne case, those questions kept pointing back to one person, Jeffrey. He lived in the home. He was the last person known to see Ruth alive. His timeline contained that contradiction, and he had injuries on his hands. From an investigative standpoint, those facts demanded scrutiny. But critics of the case argue that once Jeffrey became the central suspect, investigators may have stopped looking outward. No alternate perpetrator theory ever developed. No outsider suspect emerged. And once the investigation tightened around Jeffrey, every new detail, from the pallet injuries to the missing board, began reinforcing the same narrative. Whether that narrative was correct or simply compelling remains the question.
And that's the problem with cases like this. It makes it unsettling when you really start talking about it like this, because tunnel vision doesn't require bad intentions, but unfortunately, it results in bad intentions. Tunnel vision only requires humans trying to make sense out of something terrible. The thing is that they're making it sense through their lens, through their perspective, and everything that comes up, like you said, the pallet marks. The fact that he had identical marks on two hands, that to me does correlate with a pallet injury from slamming it in between two pallets more than it does swinging an axe. How are you going to get your own hand 2 times from swinging an axe on the outside knuckle? That just doesn't make any sense to me. The pallet makes sense for that injury. It's the tunnel vision that they get stuck in, trying to make everything fit their narrative, because in their minds, they may feel like they're being diligent, but in actuality, they're just really trying to sweep it under the rug and fit it under their umbrella that they chose.
Right. Let's get this solved and book them, Daniel. Yeah. Moving on.
Yeah, it's actually, tunnel vision is really just another word for laziness. I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah, it closes all other doors. And when a crime scene feels closed, when the evidence suggests someone inside the home, the circle of suspicion can become very small. Sometimes that circle lands on the right person. Sometimes history tells us it doesn't. Now, Jeffrey Pyne was charged with first-degree murder, but was convicted of second-degree murder. He was later sentenced to 20 to 60 years. The jury rejected premeditation, meaning they believed Jeffrey likely caused the death, but they were not convinced it was planned. The middle ground shaped the verdict. Reporting also notes that during the trial, Jeffrey did not testify, and the defense did not call any witnesses. That fact alone can shape a jury, even though a defendant has an absolute constitutional right not to testify. Now we come to one of the most fascinating elements of this case, the verdict itself. Jeffrey Pyne was charged with first degree, as I mentioned, but that requires a proof of premeditation. Did jurors convict because they were certain or because they felt someone needed to be held responsible, and second degree felt like the compromise? That distinction matters enormously. Second degree murder means the jury believed he caused her death, but they were not convinced it was premeditated. And years later, defense attorney James Champion said he spoke with jurors after the trial. Now, according to him, he asked them a haunting question. If the judge had not given you the option of second-degree murder, would you have acquitted? And Champion later said the jurors all told him yes. Now, we should be careful here. Post-trial conversations are not official findings. But if true, that statement reveals something profound about how juries sometimes work. When the evidence does not feel strong enough for the most severe charge, but the jurors still feel someone must be responsible, they may gravitate toward a middle ground.
And that is the terrifying part when you think about it. Because a compromised verdict might feel reasonable in a jury room, but for the person convicted, it's their entire life. So in a jury room, when they're debating all of the facts in front of them, and they're debating whether or not to convict on certain charges, they brought him in there for first-degree murder. They could not prove their case. To give them a booby prize is kind of bananas when you think of it from the defendant's point of view. So, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. Not per se this case, but just these types of situations in general. Let's say it was extremely circumstantial and it looked bad for one person. That person actually didn't do it. They put up the best case possible for them to beat the larger charge that they're being charged with, and they win. But yet somehow they still lose because there was a booby prize given to the jury.
That's right.
Kind of crazy.
It's totally bonkers. I mean, how can you be charged with first degree, but yet before you dismiss the jury, you give them an option of second degree?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
I feel like that's unfair, and I feel like sometimes that's why our system is seemingly irrevocably broken, because there's so many rules. That's like my little fit about circumstantial evidence. It's they're framing it through their perspective. Regardless, the point is that this kid technically won his case, but he was still convicted because they never looked elsewhere to see if any of those things fit anyone else, because they got tunnel visioned on him and that was it. So the jury was like, this is all we're going to get, so somebody's got to pay. It's a little bit of a mob mentality, a little bit, if you look at it from a different angle.
Yeah, good point. Now, after his conviction in December of 2012, Jeffrey Pyne began the appeals process. The first step was a direct appeal to the Michigan Court of Appeals, where his legal team raised several arguments about how the trial had been conducted. Their appeal focused on a handful of key claims, such as improper character evidence. The defense argued that the prosecutors introduced testimony suggesting Jeffrey had violent tendencies or negative character traits that were not directly related to the murder itself. Now, in criminal law, this type of evidence is tightly controlled. The concern is that the jurors might begin judging a defendant based on personality or past behavior rather than the evidence of the crime. The appellate court ultimately ruled that the evidence introduced at trial did not unfairly prejudice the jury.
That was what I was freaking out about before. I always find prejudicial evidence a little bit squirrely. Sometimes I feel like prejudicial is exactly what we're there for. We're there to judge them, so let us know the facts. Let us judge them on the whole picture.
I couldn't agree more.
I also do agree, two things are true at once. I also do agree, let's just say, I don't know, I beat somebody up when I was a kid, and then I'm in jail for beating somebody up, which actually caused their death when I'm 50 years old. Do you know what I mean? That would be prejudicial. Who I was as a 16-year-old is not who I am as a 50-year-old. You know what I mean? So, like, it's a slippery slope. However, I feel like if it was facts should be allowed in, no matter how prejudicial they seem.
I agree.
I don't know. Slippery slope.
Yep. They also argued ineffective assistance of counsel. So another argument raised on appeal involved Jeffrey's own defense team. His attorneys argued that certain strategic decisions made during the trial may have harmed his defense. For example, the defense did not call witnesses and Jeffrey himself did not testify. Appeals courts review these claims carefully, but they must determine whether the alleged mistake actually changed the outcome of the trial. And in this case, the court concluded that the defense strategy did not rise to the level of ineffective assistance. Third, circumstantial evidence. So one of the central arguments in the appeal focused on the nature of the evidence itself. The defense emphasized that the prosecution's case was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. No eyewitnesses, no confession, no confirmed murder weapon, and no direct forensic evidence placing Jeffrey at the moment of the killing. But appellate courts have long held that circumstantial evidence can be legally sufficient to support a conviction. The judges ultimately ruled that the combination of evidence presented at trial was strong enough for a reasonable jury to reach the verdict it did. After the state appeals were exhausted, Jeffrey Pyne filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan in 2017. A habeas petition is essentially a request for a federal court to review whether a state conviction violated constitutional rights. The federal court examined the same arguments, including the admission of evidence and the effectiveness of the defense. And in 2018, the petition was denied. The court concluded that the state courts had not violated federal law when upholding the conviction.
At that point, the legal system had reviewed the case multiple times, but I am still stuck with the fact that they never went anywhere else. They had the tunnel vision. They had their sights on him the whole time. They kept enforcing the whole locked house thing, no other access thing, all of which most likely were not true. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, because people be living, life be lifing. Nobody leaves their doors unlocked all the time. A lot of people go in and out of their house through their garage. She was found in the garage. That to me says it doesn't have to be someone inside the house if it was the garage. Do you know what I mean? And then the cleanup. I mean, I would like to see pictures of this kid's room because I'm guessing it looks like every other 20-something-year-old guy's room if they still live with their parents. And I find it hard-fetched that he cleaned up that whole house so spotless that the only place they find her blood is in the slop sink in the basement, very probably far away from the garage.
The sink was in the house. Like, there was a laundry sink right inside the house. That's where it was, not in the basement.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was just thinking laundry basement in Michigan.
Right.
Okay, so regardless, I feel like, I don't know, the courts have reviewed it several times at this point.
Yeah.
Multiple times. And they still keep having this guy in prison. So what the hell do I know? But it just doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, they're not budging.
Yeah.
The jury made its decision. The state appellate court reviewed the trial, and a federal court reviewed the constitutional arguments, and each time the conviction remained in place. But even when a conviction survives appeals, the debate outside the courtroom can continue, and it is. Because appeals courts are not deciding whether a defendant is innocent. They are deciding whether the trial was conducted legally. And that distinction is where many wrongful conviction debates begin. And that's why, even today, people still ask the same question that faced the jury in 2012. Did the circumstantial evidence reveal the truth, or only the appearance of it? And there's one final detail about this case that rarely gets discussed. Many people believe a murder conviction requires direct evidence, something like DNA, a confession, or an eyewitness, but that's not actually how most homicide cases work. In American courts, circumstantial evidence can be just as powerful as direct evidence. In fact, many successful prosecutions rely on patterns of smaller facts that, when combined, form a narrative investigators believe explains the crime. Right back to that thinking about it like a puzzle. One piece alone may not reveal the picture, but when enough pieces fit together, jurors may feel confident they understand what the image is supposed to be. In the Jeffrey Pyne case, prosecutors asked jurors to look at several pieces: the timeline, the hand injuries, the locked house, the conflicting explanation about yard work. None of those details alone prove murder, but together, prosecutors argued they formed a pattern that pointed to one conclusion. The defense, however, saw something different. They saw a puzzle missing too many pieces. And that disagreement is why this case continues to divide people even today. Because circumstantial cases often leave us with the same difficult question: do these pieces reveal the truth? Or do they simply look like they do? Now here's what we can say without speculation. Ruth Pyne was killed on May 27, 2011 in Highland Township and was found at 2:30 p.m. The house presented as sealed, deadbolt, no forced entry, garage door likely closed. Jeffrey reported leaving about 1:30 p.m., tied to a yard work claim later contradicted by testimony. His hands were injured. The pallet explanation was disputed by co-workers and interpreted by the state as consistent with weapon swinging. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 20 to 60 years. The conviction was affirmed on appeal, and habeas relief was denied. Everything beyond that, who actually did it, whether the evidence should have been enough, whether the jury compromised, is where the debate lives. And that is why this case continues to haunt discussions of Michigan criminal law. Now, Christine, after everything we've looked at tonight, what's the piece of this case that stays with you the most?
It's the uncertainty. Because if Jeffrey Pyne is guilty, then his son killed his mother in a moment of anger or frustration, and that's tragic. But let me also continue on with, I think the legal system in and of itself is a little bit unfair. Jeffrey Pyne didn't have the money to hire a skilled narrator, a skilled storyteller, and that skilled narrative storyteller also knows a lot about the law. So I'm sure Jeffrey Pyne didn't afford the best of those, but the state usually always has the best of those, especially for capital cases. Mm-hmm. So it's always, the deck is always stacked, which adds to the tragedy. Mm-hmm. Because if he didn't do this, then
who did?
Yeah, somewhere there's a person who killed Ruth Pyne, and the truth about what happens in that garage has never been found out. Either way, there's a family that lost everything.
Exactly, and I will tell you, I have someone in mind that I'm surprised they never even brought up. So we're going to go back a little bit to Jeffrey's father. His father didn't do it. I really don't think so. It's not him that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking about the woman he was having the affair with, that he was leaving his wife for. That makes sense.
Yeah. That also would explain the passionate manner in which he killed her.
Agreed.
And just because of my funny little anecdote about a 20-something-year-old boy not being a clean freak enough to be able to clean up a crime scene, guess what that other woman probably was? Adept at cleaning enough and knowing how to get rid of blood. Because the woman, taking care of her own household, that would actually be a possibility. In my mind, at least.
Yeah, mine too. That's all I kept thinking about once I read about, the husband asking for divorce. And then all of a sudden she's like, okay, I'll take my meds. And all of a sudden everything's fine. I don't think that the lover would be that happy about it.
Exactly.
So that's where my brain goes. I think this kid is innocent. And one other thing I'll also point out is during his interrogation, the kid went from supposedly left the house, did the lilacs and the water in the basement, then went straight to work. So he had on like a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. And as he's in the interview, the detective said, "Oh, what is that on your pants?" And it looked like they took his pants and his shirt and they made him show his body and all that. He had no other scratches, wounds, nothing, just the 2 blisters where the skin was gone. And they thought they saw like what could be a spot, like a teeny tiny spot of blood on his jeans. Well, when they processed that, it was paint. So like legitimately, this kid had 0 evidence on his person, period.
Yeah, after head and neck trauma like that, there's no way he would have had it in his hair. You know what I mean?
It would have been in his ear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how about all around his fingernail beds? Blood isn't easy to get off of you, that's for sure.
No.
Well, that's the thing about justice. Sometimes the verdict ends the trial, but it doesn't end the questions. This has been Malice in the Mitten, and as always, thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we will see you all back on Wednesday for Round Robin. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.